For over 200 years, this was the engine of the richest nation on earth. Not machines, not gold, but people, owned as property. By 1860, nearly 4 million human beings were enslaved in America. Their forced labor built an empire of cotton, sugar, and staggering wealth. This soft white fiber became the most valuable crop in the world, and it was picked, by hand, by people who would never be paid. This story does not begin in America. It begins across the vast Atlantic Ocean more than 4 centuries ago in unimaginable darkness. For 3 centuries, ships carried over 12 million captured Africans across this sea. Nearly 2 million never survived the terrible crossing. On arrival, human beings were sold at public auctions like livestock. Families were torn apart forever. Parents separated from their children. In 1619, the first ship carrying enslaved Africans reached the colony of Virginia. That single moment would change America forever. Colony by colony, cruel new laws were written. They declared a human being could be owned for life and passed down like property. And the most horrifying part? A child born to an enslaved mother was enslaved too from their very first breath. For the wealthy owners, this system built breathtaking fortunes. Grand mansions rose across the South, funded entirely by stolen labor. But behind every mansion stood the cabins of the enslaved. 2 Americas, side by side, one built on the suffering of the other. From before sunrise until after dark, they worked. They cleared forests, drained swamps, and planted the crops that made America rich. Tobacco, rice, sugar, and above all, cotton. These crops fed the world and made the enslavers some of the richest men alive. By 1860, cotton made up more than half of all American exports. The enslaved South had become an economic superpower feeding the world. Cotton flowed from southern ports to the factories of the North and Europe. It was the oil of its day, and America controlled it. By now, the entire economy, North and South, was tangled in slavery. Even northern banks and factories quietly depended on it. Northern factories spun southern cotton into cloth sold worldwide. The chains of slavery reached into every corner of the nation. Then, in 1793, one invention changed everything. The cotton gin could clean cotton 50 times faster than a human hand. You would think a machine would free people from labor. Instead, it did the opposite. Cotton became so profitable that slavery exploded. In just 70 years, the enslaved population exploded from 700,000 to nearly 4 million. So, how did anyone fight back? Life under slavery was built on total control. Every hour of every day was dictated by the enslaver. Yet the human spirit could not be owned. In their few precious hours of rest, they built families, faith, and community. They created a rich culture that survives to this day. They kept African traditions alive through music and song. These very songs would later give birth to jazz, blues, and gospel. In secret, they learned to read, though it was forbidden. Knowledge was power, and every stolen word was a quiet act of rebellion. Some believed they even hid secret messages in quilts and songs, codes pointing the way to freedom hidden in plain sight. Some rose up in open rebellion. In 1831, a man named Nat Turner led a revolt that shook the entire South to its core. But some refused to wait. They chose the most dangerous path of all, to run. To risk everything for a single chance at freedom. Escaping meant traveling hundreds of miles on foot, at night, through swamps and forests, hunted by armed men and dogs. The revolts terrified enslavers. In response, they passed even harsher laws, and fear gripped the South for decades to come. Their only guide was the North Star. Follow it, they were told, and it would lead you north, toward freedom. To be free, they had to reach the northern states, or Canada, a journey across a divided nation, half slave, half free, and they were not alone. A secret network of safe houses stretched across the country. It was called the Underground Railroad. It was not a real railroad. It was a chain of brave people, black and white, who risked everything to hide runaways in their homes. They used railroad code words. Safe houses were stations. Guides were conductors, and the escaping people were the precious cargo. Crossing a single river could mean the difference between slavery and freedom. Many waded through freezing water to throw off the dogs, and the most famous conductor of all was a woman who had escaped slavery herself. Her name was Harriet Tubman. Tubman returned to the South around 13 times, risking her life to lead others out. She never lost a single passenger. Slave owners put a huge bounty on her head, yet she was never caught, earning the nickname Moses for leading her people to freedom. Over time, the Underground Railroad helped tens of thousands escape. It was one of history's greatest acts of quiet rebellion. Meanwhile, in the North, another escaped man fought with words. Frederick Douglass became the most powerful voice against slavery. Once forbidden to read, Douglass wrote a best-selling book about his life. His words shocked the world and exposed slavery's brutal truth. Douglass traveled the world giving speeches, even meeting presidents and queens. An escaped man had become one of the most famous voices on earth. A growing movement of abolitionists spread across the North, demanding an end to slavery in churches, newspapers, and meeting halls. Some abolitionists turned to violence. In 1859, a radical named John Brown tried to start an armed uprising to end slavery by force. His raid failed, and he was executed. But it lit a fuse. The nation was now a powder keg, ready to explode, and it soon would. By the 1850s, America was tearing itself apart. The question of slavery poisoned everything: politics, religion, and family itself. In Congress, debates turned into brawls. One senator was even beaten nearly to death on the Senate floor over the issue of slavery. A novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin exposed slavery's cruelty to millions. It became the best-selling book of the century after the Bible. Every new state threatened to tip the balance. Would America become a free nation or a slave nation? Neither side would back down. The nation split visibly in two. The South glowing with slavery, the North standing free, and a tense line forming between them. Then, in 1860, a tall lawyer from Illinois was elected president. He promised to stop slavery from spreading. His name was Abraham Lincoln. The South was enraged. To them, Lincoln's election threatened their entire way of life. And so they made a fateful decision. 11 southern states broke away and formed their own nation, the Confederacy. For the first time, the United States was split in two. On April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons fired on a federal fort. The American Civil War had begun. It would become the deadliest in the nation's history. Both sides believed the war would be quick. They were terribly wrong. Hundreds of thousands of young men marched off to fight. This was a new kind of war. Railroads moved entire armies. Telegraphs sent orders in seconds. Photography captured its horrors for the first time. The Confederacy fought to preserve slavery. The Union fought, at first, simply to keep the country together. But that would soon change. The Union had the factories, railroads, and far more people. The South had brilliant generals and the will to fight to the bitter end. The battles were massive and horrific. In a single day at Antietam, over 22,000 men fell, the bloodiest day in American history. The war transformed warfare forever. The first battle between armored ironclad ships changed navies around the world overnight. New weapons made this war deadlier than any before it. But amid the horror, the purpose of the war was about to transform completely. As the war raged, Lincoln made a historic decision. He would turn the war to save the Union into a war to end slavery itself. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that all enslaved people in the rebel states were now free. It was not yet freedom for all, but it changed everything. Now every Union victory became a victory for human freedom. And now, formerly enslaved men could fight for their own freedom. Nearly 200,000 black soldiers joined the Union Army. One famous regiment, the 54th Massachusetts, led a heroic charge against a fort, proving black soldiers' valor to a doubting nation. They fought with extraordinary courage, proving their heroism in battle after battle, even while facing prejudice within their own army. Would you have had the courage to fight for your own freedom against such impossible odds? These men did, again and again. In July 1863, the two armies collided at Gettysburg. For 3 days, they fought the largest battle ever waged in North America. The Union won, but the cost was staggering. Over 50,000 casualties in 3 days. It was the turning point of the entire war. The war's cost was almost beyond comprehension. Around 750,000 soldiers died, more than in all other American wars combined. He declared the nation would have a new birth of freedom, so that government of the people, by the people, would not perish. After Gettysburg, the tide turned. The Union armies pushed relentlessly into the South, splitting the Confederacy apart piece by piece. General Sherman marched his army straight through the heart of the South, destroying everything that could feed the Confederate war effort. As the Union Army advanced, enslaved people freed themselves by the thousands, walking off plantations to follow the soldiers to freedom. By early 1865, the Confederacy was collapsing. Its cities fell, its armies starved. The end of the war and of slavery was finally near. In April 1865, in a small Virginia farmhouse, the Confederate Army finally surrendered. After 4 long years, the war was over. Across the North and among the newly freed, there was jubilation. The Union was saved, and 4 million people were now free. But just days after the war ended, tragedy struck. While watching a play, President Lincoln was assassinated by a Confederate sympathizer. A nation celebrating victory was plunged into mourning. Lincoln's funeral train carried him home past millions of grieving Americans. But Lincoln's greatest goal was achieved. In December 1865, the 13th Amendment forever abolished slavery across all of the United States. The chains that had bound millions for 240 years were finally broken. It was one of the greatest moments in human history. On June 19, 1865, the last enslaved people in Texas finally learned they were free. That day is now celebrated as Juneteenth. For the first time, families torn apart by sale could search for each other. Freed people walked hundreds of miles to reunite with loved ones. Freedom meant they could finally learn. Newly freed people of all ages rushed to build schools and churches, hungry for education. Freed communities built their own towns, businesses, and universities. In one generation, they achieved what centuries of slavery said was impossible. During Reconstruction, Black Americans voted and held office for the first time. 16 served in Congress. Progress seemed unstoppable. For a brief, shining moment, democracy expanded. Black men voted for the first time and helped rebuild the shattered nation. The nation was whole again and legally free. But the promise of true equality was still a long, painful road ahead. For within a decade, that progress would be violently rolled back. The end of slavery was not the end of the struggle for freedom. New laws would soon enforce segregation and strip away hard-won rights. The fight for true equality would continue for another 100 years. The abolition of slavery was not the finish line. It was the first, hardest step on a journey toward freedom that still continues today. America's struggle echoed worldwide. Within decades, nation after nation followed, until slavery was abolished across almost the entire globe. Brazil freed the last enslaved people in the Americas in 1888. A movement born in chains had become a global triumph of the human spirit. The courage of those who fought slavery inspired every freedom movement that followed, from civil rights to struggles for justice today. Today, museums and memorials ensure the world never forgets both the horror that happened and the extraordinary courage that overcame it. The very plantations that symbolized this cruelty are now places of learning, where people from all over the world come to remember. From the deepest cruelty humans can inflict rose one of the greatest victories for human dignity the world has ever seen. The story of slavery is the story of the very worst and the very best of humanity, of unimaginable cruelty and unbreakable hope. The same North Star that once guided the enslaved toward freedom still shines above us, a reminder that the fight for liberty never truly ends. So here is a question to leave you with. How did ordinary people find the courage to resist such overwhelming injustice? Tell me below. They turned the darkest chapter of history into a triumph of the human spirit. And that is a story that must be told forever.